I worked the night shift at Hawthorne Middle School for almost 5 years. My shift started at exactly 10 p.m. every night, no exceptions. I'd clock out just before sunrise, usually around 5:30 in the morning, right before the first buses rolled into the parking lot, and the building slowly came back to life. At first, I didn't mind the job at all. No screaming kids, no teachers complaining about spilled coffee or broken desks, no principals watching the clock. Just me, my cart, and an empty school. But there's something people don't tell you about empty buildings. They aren't quiet in the way you expect. They breathe. During the day, Hawthorne felt like any other school. Bright hallways, posters on the walls, lockers slamming shut. It felt familiar, safe, ordinary. At night, that same building felt like a shell that had been abandoned too suddenly. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressing down on you like the air before a storm. Every sound carried too far. Every echo lasted too long. And when you're the only person inside, your mind starts working against you. A pipe knocking in the walls doesn't sound like plumbing anymore. It sounds like footsteps. A locker door popping open doesn't sound mechanical. It sounds intentional. I learned pretty quickly which noises to ignore. The hum of the lights, the distant thud of heating pipes, the occasional creak as the building settled. Most of it became background noise. Most of it. The one place I never got used to was the basement. Hawthorne Middle School was built in the early 1950s, and the basement stretched beneath nearly half the building. Unlike the classrooms upstairs, it had never really been updated. Down there, it was all concrete and shadows. Low ceilings with exposed pipes ran overhead like veins. Long, narrow hallways twisted in ways that didn't quite make sense, branching into storage rooms filled with decades of forgotten junk. Old desks stacked to the ceiling, broken chairs, boxes of outdated textbooks, rusty equipment no one remembered how to use. The air was always damp. It smelled like wet cement and mold, with something metallic underneath it that I could never quite place. The fluorescent lights flickered when they worked at all. Some nights, entire sections stayed dark, no matter how many switches you flipped. During my first week on the job, one of the older custodians, a guy named Frank, who'd been there longer than anyone, pulled me aside. "Do yourself a favor," he said, lowering his voice even though we were alone. "Stay out of the basement unless you absolutely have to." I laughed and asked him why. Frank smirked, but his eyes didn't match his expression. "Because that place doesn't like being bothered," he said, "and it remembers when you go down there." I assumed he was messing with the new guy. I stopped assuming that after a while. The most nights, I didn't need to go down there. My usual routine kept me on the upper floors, emptying trash, mopping hallways, locking classrooms, but even when I didn't go near the basement, I could feel it. Sometimes I'd pass the stairwell door and get an inexplicable chill, like I'd just stepped into a cold shadow. The rest of the building would be warm and stale. But that door always felt different, like it led somewhere it shouldn't. I avoided it whenever I could. Until the night, I couldn't. It was about 2 years into the job when everything changed. I remember the night clearly because nothing else went wrong. No flickering lights, no strange noises, just another routine shift. Until I checked my task list. Taped to my cart was a handwritten note from my supervisor. Need folding chairs, brought up from basement storage for weekend event. My stomach sank the moment I read it. Those chairs had been stored in the basement for as long as I'd worked there, probably longer. I stood at the basement door for a full minute, staring at it. I considered calling my supervisor and asking if it could wait until morning, but I didn't want to sound lazy, so I grabbed my flashlight, took a deep breath, and pulled the heavy door open. The stairwell echoed with every step I took. My boots sounded way too loud, like the sound was bouncing back at me from somewhere deeper than it should have. When I reached the bottom, I flipped the light switch. Only 2 of the overhead lights came on. The rest of the hallway stayed buried in darkness. The smell hit me immediately, damp, stale, with that same metallic edge. It felt thicker down there, like the air itself didn't want to move. I turned on my flashlight and followed the hallway. The folding chairs were supposed to be in the second storage room on the left. The first room was stacked floor to ceiling with broken desks. The second door was rusted and half jammed. When I pulled it open, it screamed. The sound echoed down the basement, sharp and painful, like nails on a chalkboard. I winced and stood still, listening. Nothing answered back. Inside, the folding chairs were stacked unevenly against the wall. Some leaned at awkward angles like they'd been moved recently. I grabbed as many as I could carry, trying to minimize trips. That's when I heard it. A soft, dragging sound, like someone slowly sliding their shoe across the concrete floor. I froze instantly. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The sound stopped. Still bent over with chairs in my arms, I strained to listen. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking my ribs. Nothing. Slowly, I straightened up and peeked into the hallway, shining my flashlight both directions. The beam cut through the darkness. Empty. Just concrete walls, hanging pipes, shadows stretching too far. I told myself it was nothing. Pipes settling, a mouse. My imagination filling the silence. I carried the chairs toward the stairwell. Halfway there, a sudden cold draft brushed across my face. I stopped mid-step. The basement never had drafts. No windows, no open vents, no moving air. This felt like standing next to an open freezer. I shined my flashlight up and down the hallway. Nothing looked different. I set the chairs at the bottom of the stairs and headed back for more. When I re-entered the storage room, something felt off immediately. The stacks of chairs looked wrong. Not dramatically, just enough that my brain registered it before I could explain it, like they'd shifted while I was gone. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to remember exactly how they'd been leaning. I finally shook my head and told myself I was being paranoid. I picked up another load. As I turned to leave, I heard it again, a dull thump, then scraping. This time, it came from farther down the basement hallway. My flashlight shook slightly as I aimed it toward the sound. About 20 feet away, one of the classroom doors, one that should have been locked, was cracked open. My stomach dropped. I knew I hadn't touched that door. The school was locked every night. No one else was supposed to be there. Every instinct told me to drop the chairs and run, but instead, I stood there, convincing myself it was nothing. Air pressure. A loose hinge. Anything but what my gut was telling me. I carried the chairs quickly to the stairwell, then came back empty-handed. The door was still open. Just enough for someone to peek through. My mouth went dry. I took a slow step toward it. Then another. Each step echoed louder than it should have. When I was close enough, I whispered, "Hello? Anyone down here?" My voice sounded small, weak. No response. I swallowed hard, then pushed the door open fast and shined my flashlight inside. The room was empty. Dusty equipment. Old boxes stacked along the walls, cobwebs hanging in the corners. I stepped inside for a second, trying to calm my breathing. That's when I heard it again, dragging footsteps. This time, they were behind me. I spun around and pointed the flashlight down the hallway. Nothing, no movement, no shadows shifting. But I felt it. That heavy pressure. That unmistakable feeling of being watched. My skin prickled from my neck down my spine. I didn't care about the chairs anymore. I backed toward the stairwell, without turning my back, grabbed what I'd already brought up, and ran. I took the stairs 2 at a time, and didn't stop until I was back in the main hallway upstairs, gasping for air. My hands were shaking as I locked the basement door behind me, even though I wasn't supposed to. That night, I told myself it was just stress, lack of sleep, my imagination running wild, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And whatever was in that basement had noticed me. I didn't sleep after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that cracked door at the end of the basement hallway. I replayed the dragging sound over and over in my head, trying to find a logical explanation for it. By the time my next shift rolled around, I had almost convinced myself it was stress, long hours, too much caffeine, an overactive imagination. That confidence lasted until I unlocked the school. The moment I stepped inside, the building felt wrong, not loud, not chaotic, just expectant, like it knew I was back. For the next week, I stayed as far away from the basement as possible. I found excuses. I rearranged my route. If something on my task list involved the basement, I quietly skipped it. No one said anything at first. But schools don't let things slide for long. It was the following Thursday when I was mopping the main hallway directly above the basement stairwell. The building was quiet. The kind of quiet where even your own breathing sounds too loud. I was halfway down the hall when I heard it. Bang. The sound came from beneath my feet. I froze, gripping the mop handle. A second passed, then another sound. Bang. Evenly spaced, heavy, deliberate. My heart started racing. Then came the third. Bang. It sounded like someone hitting the wall with their fist. Before I could move, the basement door rattled violently, like someone had thrown their full weight against it from the other side. The handle shook. The hinges groaned. I dropped the mop. Water spilled across the tiles, but I didn't care. I stood there, staring at the door, barely breathing. I didn't open it. I couldn't. After a few seconds, that felt like minutes. The banging stopped. The rattling stopped. The hallway fell silent again. I stood there long after the sound was gone, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. That night, I locked the basement door again, and for the first time since I'd started working there, I seriously considered quitting. After that, I made a rule for myself. I would never go into the basement alone again. If something needed to be brought up, I waited until another custodian was working the same shift. If I was scheduled alone, it could wait until morning. I didn't tell anyone why. I knew how it would sound. Most people don't believe in things they can't see. But belief had nothing to do with what I felt. A few nights later, I was emptying trash near the stairwell when I heard something else. Not banging, not dragging, a voice. It was faint, muffled, almost like it was traveling through the walls. At first, I couldn't make out the words. I pressed my ear closer to the basement door. The voice wasn't loud, but it was steady, low, male. It sounded like someone speaking just on the other side of the door. I stepped back immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I had to shove them into my pockets to hide it. I didn't hear words clearly, but I heard enough to know one thing. It wasn't random noise. It was trying to speak. That night I left early. I told my supervisor I felt sick, which wasn't a lie. The next week I worked with another custodian named Mark. Mark had been there almost as long as I had, but we'd never worked the same shifts before. While we were cleaning classrooms, he casually asked, "Hey, have you ever heard stuff coming from the basement?" My stomach dropped. I tried to sound calm. "Like what?" He shrugged. "Footsteps, banging. Sometimes it sounds like someone talking." I stopped what I was doing. "Doesn't that bother you?" I asked. Mark laughed, but there was something forced about it. "That place has always been weird. Frank used to say you should never answer if you hear something call out from down there." My blood ran cold. "Why?" I asked. Mark hesitated. "Because whatever it is, your voice." That night, I dreamed about the basement. I was standing at the bottom of the stairs, flashlight in hand. The hallway stretched farther than it should have, disappearing into darkness. At the end of it, something was standing still. Not moving, just waiting. When I woke up, my sheets were soaked with sweat. A few nights later, I was scheduled alone again. I avoided the basement completely, or at least I tried to. Around 3 a.m., while I was cleaning the gym hallway, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then they stayed off. I stood there in total darkness for a few seconds before my emergency flashlight kicked in. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, heavy, coming from the direction of the basement stairwell. I held my breath and listened. Each step dragged slightly, like something was being pulled along the floor. I told myself not to look, but I did. At the far end of the hallway, the basement door was open. Just a crack. The darkness behind it looked thicker than it should have, and from inside, something was breathing. Slow, deep, too close. I backed away without turning my back, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The breathing followed, not louder, just closer. Then, softly, I heard my name. Not shouted, whispered, like it was learning how to say it. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air burning my lungs. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I quit 2 days later. I didn't give details. I didn't explain. But even now, years later, I still think about that basement because whatever was down there didn't want me to leave. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear it in my dreams, dragging footsteps, slow breathing, and my name being whispered in the dark. I worked as a night custodian at a large public high school for almost 3 years. I was the newest guy on the team, which meant I always got the worst shifts. Most of the time, that meant overnight, while the other custodians rotated through day and evening hours. I was stuck clocking in at 9:30 p.m. and leaving just before dawn. The building was massive, 4 floors, 2 gyms, long hallways that stretched so far you couldn't see the ends without turning on all the lights. During the day, it was loud and chaotic. At night, it felt like a maze designed to confuse you. The rule was simple: go floor by floor, room by room, turn off lights, empty trash, lock doors. If you rushed, you missed things, and missing things got you written up. Most nights were uneventful. Most nights. There was one floor everyone hated, the 3rd floor. It was older than the rest of the building, and most of its classrooms weren't used anymore. Some were permanently locked. Others had been converted into storage rooms filled with outdated books, broken furniture, and old lab equipment no one trusted anymore. The air felt different up there, colder, heavier. Even when the heat was running, that floor never quite warmed up. I tried not to think about it. One Friday night, I was working alone. One of the other custodians had called in sick, and management decided it wasn't worth calling in a replacement. That meant the entire building was mine to cover. At first, everything was normal. I started on the 1st floor, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces. The lights flickered in a few hallways, but the building was old. That wasn't unusual. By midnight, I made my way up to the 3rd floor. The moment I stepped out of the stairwell, I felt it. That familiar sense of unease. The hallway was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like sound itself didn't want to exist there. My boots echoed loudly against the tile, and every step felt like it carried too far. Lockers lined the walls, their metal doors slightly warped with age. Every now and then, one would click softly as it settled, and the sound made my shoulders tense. I reminded myself to focus on the job. Trash first, then mopping. I was halfway through cleaning the main hallway when I noticed something that made me stop. A door was open. About 20 feet ahead of me, one of the old classroom doors stood ajar. That didn't make sense. I was certain I'd checked every room earlier in the night. Every door had been closed. Locked. I stood there staring at it, mop still in my hands. My first instinct was to ignore it, walk past it quickly and pretend I hadn't seen anything, but something about that open door pulled at my attention. I leaned the mop against the wall and walked toward it slowly. The door was old wood, with a square glass window at eye level. I pushed it open a little more and shined my flashlight inside. The room looked empty. Desks stacked along the walls, boxes in the corners, dust covering everything. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. Then I noticed the box near the back wall. It wasn't lined up with the others. It was tilted slightly, and there were faint scuff marks on the floor leading toward it, like it had been dragged. My stomach tightened. I knew I hadn't moved it. I stepped back and pulled the door closed, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe a day custodian had been in here earlier. Maybe I just didn't remember. I grabbed my mop and continued down the hallway, but I couldn't stop thinking about that room. After finishing the hallway, I headed toward the stairwell to go down to the second floor. As I passed that classroom again, my heart nearly stopped. The door was open, wide open. I stood frozen, staring at it. I knew, absolutely knew, I had shut it. Slowly, I stepped closer. I peeked inside. The room looked the same, except for one thing. The box was no longer near the wall. It was now sitting in the middle of the floor. My pulse hammered in my ears. I swallowed hard and whispered, "Hello? Is someone in here?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the room. For a moment, there was only silence. Then I heard it. Breathing. Slow. Deep. Deliberate. Not a pipe. Not air moving. Someone trying to stay quiet and failing. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Instead, I slammed the door shut and bolted down the hallway toward the stairwell. My heart was racing and sweat ran down my back. I pressed myself against the stairwell door, listening. Nothing followed me. No footsteps. No voices. Just silence. After a few seconds, I pulled out my phone and called my supervisor. I hated bothering him in the middle of the night, but I didn't care anymore. When he answered, I told him everything. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes felt like hours. When he arrived, we went back up together. He walked straight into the classroom with his flashlight. The box was still in the middle of the floor. We checked everywhere. Behind desks, inside closets, under tables. Nothing. He suggested I was tired, maybe imagining things. I didn't argue, but I knew what I'd heard, that breathing hadn't come from an empty room. That was the night I realized something important. That classroom was never empty. After that night, I tried to pretend nothing had happened. I showed up for my shifts. I followed the same routine. I told myself the breathing had been stress, exhaustion, my mind filling in gaps where there were none. But the third floor wouldn't let me forget. The very next week, I noticed small things. Things I couldn't explain away. Classroom doors I knew I'd locked would be slightly open when I passed them again later in the night. Trash cans would be tipped over in empty rooms. Once, I found a chair placed directly in the middle of a hallway, like someone had dragged it there and left it on purpose. I stopped staying on that floor longer than necessary. Still, I felt watched, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, constant way, like someone standing just behind your shoulder, but never stepping into view. A few nights later, I worked with another custodian named Alex. We were taking a short break near the stairwell when I finally worked up the courage to ask, "Has anything weird ever happened to you on the third floor?" Alex didn't answer right away. He stared at the floor for a long moment, then said, "You mean the classroom?" My chest tightened. "There's more than one," I said, carefully. He shook his head. "No, there's only one." He told me that years ago, a student had been caught hiding overnight in that classroom. Supposedly, it started as a prank, sneaking into the building to scare staff. But something went wrong. No one ever explained what exactly happened. Just that after that incident, teachers refused to use the room. The administration locked it for months. "And the breathing?" I asked, quietly. Alex glanced toward the stairwell. "People hear it sometimes," he said. "Usually when they're alone." That should have been enough to make me quit. It wasn't. Months passed. Nothing dramatic happened, but the feeling never went away. Even when I wasn't on the third floor, I felt eyes on me. Every shadow looked too solid. Every sound felt deliberate. Then came the night I worked alone again. It was raining outside, heavy enough that I could hear it hitting the windows even from inside the building. The sound made everything feel closed in, sealed off. I avoided the third floor as long as I could, but eventually, I had no choice. When I reached the top of the stairs, the hallway lights were already on. I hadn't turned them on. That was the first thing that made my stomach drop. I stepped out slowly, my flashlight in hand. The hallway looked normal, too normal. Then I noticed the classroom door, the same one. It was open. I didn't go near it. I started backing toward the stairwell, telling myself I could come back later with someone else. That's when the door creaked wider. Just a little. Enough to let sound escape. Breathing. Slow. Deep. Closer than it had ever been before. Then something else. A voice. Not loud. Not whispered. Almost conversational. "Hey!" My blood ran cold. The voice came from inside the room. It was trying to sound normal. Friendly. I didn't answer. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Hey," it said again, a little clearer this time. "Can you help me?" I shook my head, even though it couldn't see me. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, rain soaking through my clothes. I called my supervisor and told him I was done. I didn't give details. I didn't need to. I never worked another overnight shift there. But even years later, I still think about that classroom. Because I realized something on my way out that night. The voice didn't sound like a student. It sounded older, tired, like it had been waiting a very long time for someone to answer. I had been working as a night custodian at an old high school for almost 2 years. The building was enormous. 4 floors, 2 gyms, countless classrooms, and an auditorium that everyone avoided if they could. During the day, the auditorium looked normal. A stage, rows of seats, heavy curtains. But at night, it felt like stepping into a different world. Even with the lights on, shadows lingered in corners where light shouldn't reach. Every sound carried strangely. If you dropped a broom, the echo bounced off the walls and ceiling, disorienting you. I saved the auditorium for last most nights. I hated it. My instincts told me to stay away, but rules were rules, and I had a job to do. One winter night, I had to clean the auditorium earlier than usual. There was a play scheduled the next morning, and I arrived around midnight, dragging my cart behind me. The side door creaked as I opened it, and when it slammed shut behind me, the echo stretched across the room like it was alive. I started sweeping the aisles between the seats. The chairs were old, metal folding seats bolted to the floor in some rows, loose in others. The broom scraped across the floor, echoing off the walls. After a few minutes, I froze. There it was. A sound. Not the echo of my broom, not a chair shifting, something else. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. I spun toward the stage. Nothing. I told myself it was a prop falling. A rat. Something mundane. Minutes later, it happened again. Slow footsteps across the stage. I stopped sweeping. My heart thumped so loudly I could feel it in my throat. The stage looked empty. Dust-covered props, stacked in corners, curtains still. But the sound was real. My instincts screamed at me to leave. I didn't. I climbed the steps to the stage slowly, flashlight cutting through the darkness. There were ropes, pulleys, old chairs, painted scenery, stacked against the walls, everything covered in dust. The beam of my flashlight caught something out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement. I spun around. Nothing. I backed off the stage, telling myself it was the building settling. Maybe a mouse in the rafters. But the feeling didn't go away. I continued sweeping the lower level, eyes darting to the balcony above. I thought I saw a shadow moving among the seats. I aimed the flashlight. Nothing. I kept my back to the wall as I moved, every instinct screaming that I was being watched. Then it happened. A whisper, low, deliberate, coming from the balcony above. I froze. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, intentional. I wanted to run. I wanted to drop the mop and leave. But I had to finish my job. I climbed the steps to the stage again, flashlight shaking in my hands. The seats stretched back in darkness. I shined the light into the balcony and thought I saw a figure, a silhouette sitting perfectly still. I blinked. It was gone. I told myself it was a coat, a chair, my imagination. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I started moving props and dusting, trying to focus on something tangible. The whispering came again, clearer this time, a voice speaking my name, directly behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The stage was empty. Props stacked the same as before, curtains unmoved. I backed away slowly, heart hammering. I reached the side door, stopped at the edge of the stage, listened. Soft footsteps on the balcony, slow, pacing, watching, impossible. The auditorium was locked. No one else should have been there. The footsteps continued, stopping and starting, like someone pacing and studying me. I finally ran to the door, pulled it open, and stepped out into the cold night air. Relief washed over me. But I could still hear the faint echo of footsteps above, fading, slowly. My hands shook so badly I could barely lock the door behind me. I leaned against it, catching my breath. Sweat dripped from my forehead. I didn't go back inside that night. The next morning, I tried to tell another custodian. He laughed, said it was an old building, probably just settling. I wasn't convinced. That whispering voice, my name, called softly and deliberately. The echoing footsteps. I felt them. I couldn't forget them. Years later, I learned why. A drama teacher had died suddenly on that stage during rehearsal. Heart attack? Right in front of the students. Some said you could still hear him walking the stage at night. Whispers from the seats. I tried to convince myself it was a story. Old building noises, shadows. But I knew the truth. I couldn't stop thinking about that night, the whispers, the footsteps. My name. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard them again. Soft, deliberate, patient. I knew eventually I'd have to go back. The play was still scheduled. Someone had to prepare the auditorium. And that someone was me. A few nights later, I returned. The air inside the building was cold, heavier than usual. I dragged my cart toward the auditorium, each step echoing down the empty hallways. I paused at the side door. My flashlight shook in my hands. I could already feel it. The stage was waiting. I stepped inside. Darkness. Silence. Too quiet. I started sweeping again, trying to focus on the task, but every shadow seemed darker than it should have been. The folds of the curtains twisted slightly as if they were breathing. I reached the middle of the main floor when I heard it. A soft footstep from above. Then another. Slow. Heavy. Watching. I froze. My flashlight illuminated the balcony seats. For a split second, I thought I saw dozens of shadows sitting there. They weren't moving, but I could feel their eyes on me. I blinked. They were gone. I climbed the steps to the stage, hands trembling. The whispering returned, clearer. My name. It was coming from the far side of the stage. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on moving props. But the voice followed me. Every time I moved, it shifted, always just behind me. Then the stage lights flickered on. Not by me, not by any switch I touched. The shadows shifted. Movement in the darkness. Dozens of them, just barely visible in the dim light. Figures in the seats, on the stage edges, even in the wings. Watching me. I felt every nerve in my body freeze. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my feet were glued to the floor. The whispering intensified. My name. Come closer. Don't be afraid. The voice was right behind me now. I could feel the breath against my neck. I spun around. Nothing. Empty stage. Dusty props. Curtains unmoved. Yet the voice persisted, circling me, whispering, mocking, patient. Then I saw it. A figure at the far edge of the stage, tall, shadowy, human-like but wrong, limbs too long, head tilting unnaturally, watching me. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, breath coming in short gasps. The figure moved closer, silently, like it didn't obey the laws of the floor or gravity. The whispers became a chorus, dozens of voices, all speaking at once. My name, my fears, secrets I hadn't shared. The auditorium was alive. Every shadow, every seat, every corner was watching, waiting. I ran, but the shadows followed. Not physically. They didn't chase me. They were everywhere I looked, behind me, in front of me, above me. And the whispering never stopped. It didn't matter which door I tried. I felt it. The building itself had trapped me. I reached the side door and yanked it open. Cold night air hit me like a wall. Relief flooded me. For a moment, I thought I was free. Then a single whisper carried behind me. You can never leave. I didn't look back. I ran through the rain, heart hammering, lungs burning. I didn't stop until I was in my car, shaking uncontrollably. I quit the next day, never went back. The play went on. Someone else prepared the auditorium. I never asked what they saw or heard, but I know what I experienced. The auditorium isn't just old, it's alive. And it remembers. It waits. And sometimes, if you stand alone on that stage at night, you might hear it. Footsteps pacing above, whispers calling your name, shadows watching from the seats, patiently, waiting.